speaker, I should say our second keynote speaker, Mr. Irwin Elman, Provincial Advocate for Children in Ontario, who will speak on the work of Janusz Korczak as relevant to the children of today as ever. But first, a word about Mr. Elman. Irwin Elman holds an extensive background as an educator, counselor, youth worker, program manager, policy developer, and child and youth advocate. In working with young people in our systems, he has carried out his roles with respect, borrowing from the courage and hope of the young people he served to create innovative approaches for youth in Ontario, Jamaica, Hungary, and Japan. For over 20 years, Irwin was the manager of the Paid Adolescent Resource Center in Toronto, a program of the Children's Aid Society of Toronto, and the Catholic Children's Aid Society there as well. Later, he was the director of client service at Central Toronto Youth Services and Innovative Children's Mental Health Center. As Ontario's first independent provincial advocate for children and youth, Irwin works to partner with children and the youth in elevating their voices to create a positive change. He's building an office that is built upon a foundation rooted in the strength and wisdom of the children and youth it serves. An office driven by the efforts of talented and passionate staff who every day strive to improve the lives of children and youth in Ontario. Mr.
I believe in promise low, deliver high, so my staff wrote that, I think, and that doesn't fit. Well, I have notes, but I think I'm going to try and speak to you from my heart. And when I do that, my staff isn't here, right? So they get very nervous when I do that. It's going to go off now. It's an honor. It's emotional to be here. I've been in BC this week, and I was at the Council of Child Advocates. So there's somebody like me in every province now in the country, independent officer of the legislature. Mary Ellen Turpelafon is the BC representative. It's called I'm the Child Advocate in Ontario. So we have similar positions. I'll spend a minute or two in a minute to talk about that. So we had this council meeting, and my mother lives in Comox now. We're closer to my brother. She's 91. Explain I'm Jewish myself, and I was visiting my mom in Comox, so I stayed extra time. And my mom, before I came last night, was saying, what are you going to say? And she said, could I see a copy of your speech? That's the first time in my history that my mom has ever asked to see a copy of my speech. And it's because she knew how important time it is for me to be here, to speak about Dr. Korczak, to be in the Holocaust Center, to be with my relatives in many ways, my community. See, I'm feeling it now. It's important to me. I can't thank you enough, Terry, for the invitation to be here and to find a way. And I've told you this, and I think you've taken some steps to start this journey between my office in Ontario and your association to see where we can take this relationship. So I mean, and I said that I'm Jewish. Some of you, and I can say this, I hope, so I'm not even sure. Some of you might say he's a bad Jew. I never had a bar mitzvah. I don't speak Hebrew. I'll explain later. I didn't even know who Dr. Korczak was till only some years ago. But there is a connection. People who sometimes I like to think of myself as a secular Jew. It's a nicer term than bad Jew, but there's a connection between us, right? And our history and child advocacy. And it's a hugely important for me. I am the provincial advocate for children and youth. Like I said, like the BC representative, Mary Ellen, each of us in each province has a separate mandate, and there's a piece of legislation that tells us what we're supposed to do. Every piece of legislation is different, means most advocates are different, all of us are different kind of backgrounds from across the country. In Ontario, the legislation says I'm supposed to elevate the voice of children and youth in state care, one way or another. And state care can mean a lot of things, but it certainly means children in what we call child welfare care in what used to be orphanages or children's homes in other parts of the world. And more often in Ontario, in foster homes and group homes, we call them. But those children, same children, kind of children in similar situations that Dr. Korczak was serving. I spent my career working with those children for 20, 30 years. Young people in Toronto who came into care, as we call it, through no fault of their own, through the child welfare system because they were being sexually, physically, emotionally abused or neglected in one way or another by the state and taken away from their homes. And the state would then care for them. I worked in created a center that would help them get ready to live on their own or live on their own eventually. And over the time met 5 to 10,000 children, young people. And many of them became kind of like an extended family to me. They always told me, don't think of yourself as our father. We had that, you remember, like a crazy uncle. So, but I welcomed that. And it was at a time in my own life when I felt the need for community and family. It was in Toronto. I say this whenever I speak. We created this center where these young people, and you should know, and you may know, that these young people in our systems of care in British Columbia or Ontario, any province, certainly Ontario, when they leave the system, when they leave the group home or the foster home, or they live on their own for a period of time, they do not do well. In Ontario, the graduation rate of high school kids who are in that situation is 40%, compared to 70 to 80% of their peers. They're overrepresented in our youth justice system, our children's mental health and adult mental health system. They're in our homeless population. At least 42% of all the homeless in Ontario have had a child welfare experience, have lived or been touched by group homes or foster homes in one way or another. They do dismally. But where I worked for 20 years, the young people were able to be successful, oftentimes. They went to university and college when none of them ever had, or they became great partners and mothers and parents. And it wasn't what we did. I'm telling you this. We created maybe the environment for them to be successful. But they did all the heavy lifting, and I always tell people that I'm the advocate in Ontario because of the heavy lifting they did. We kind of walked alongside those young people who worked so hard. And they walked in the bright light of their own full potential, and when you do that, that light shines on you working with them. And that's what happened to me, I believe. And it's what I think Ontario asked me to do in my own province, is to walk alongside those children again and create something that would allow them to shine in their own potential. And the province will glow in that. We can do that. I'm an educator by training, so I was so pleased that the dean was here and speaking. I was a teacher, and then I did a master's in education at Boise, which I'm sure thinks they're a rival of UPC, but I'm sure both faculties are really good. Boise is Ontario Institute of Studies in Education at Group T. I'm a parent of 2 children, a 5-year-old and a 9-year-old who I adopted. We adopted myself and my wife from the system. I've been away from them for a week and phone home all the time, and I think even for you, me being here and not being with hope you have a sense of both the office and sort of where I'm coming from. But I want to talk a little bit about why I think the teachings of Dr. Korczak are so important today. And I'm not an expert. I'll tell you right now, I'm not an expert. One of the things that happened to me was traveling to Japan and working in Japan for a little bit. And I did that because we were invited by social workers and lawyers in the Osaka area of Japan to help them teach children how to speak up, children in the child welfare system how to speak up. In Japan, to this day, predominantly children live in what they call children's homes. Some children's homes can have as many as 100 children in them. 60, 50, 40, they tend to be run by adults who live in the children's home. Children between the ages of 0, infants, and 18 years old live in those homes, and we were invited there to help them speak up, learn how to talk about what concerns they had, because we were very successful at doing that in Toronto. We didn't think, as I'm talking to you, we were experts, but we went and we lived in children's homes for a time. That's what I did, and tried to get to understand children's homes and see what support we could be. And when I was there, in one of those children's homes, one of the staff there said, "You know, the way you talk, Irwin, sounds like this Dr. Korczak." And I'm going, "Who is that?" Can you imagine? You know, I'm Jewish. I went through 13 years of high school. I did a political science degree at Carleton University. I went to Teachers College. I did my M.Ed at Boise. I had no idea. This is unbelievable. Incredible in many ways, but I don't think I'm the only one. And if I would have known, because when I came home I asked my mom, she told me who he was. And that would have been the way I would have found out, not from any curriculum, anywhere. And I thought, why is that? I think that's a lecture for another day. But I came back and I read, I'm no expert, but I read, came back and I read probably the biography, Kingdom of the Children. And I wanted to know a little bit more, and I know a little bit. I'm going to tell you from that perspective more about what the young people here in Canada say today, and allow you to help me make the connection. So when I think about what to tell you about the children who are living in that same situation in group homes or children's homes or foster care, I think of a girl who told me why my job was important to her. And she said, and it's the same in British Columbia, I'm telling you, she said, when she was about 10 years old, terrible things had been happening to her and her family. And you can imagine, probably from reading newspaper reports from time to time, the kind of stuff that can happen to children in their family who are in need of protection. And she said that was going on, and she was 10, and she was ducking her head and trying to cope. She had ways of making it work. And this girl was about 19 at the time when she was telling me the story. She said, I was coping. And then one day, somebody came to my door at my school and said, there's somebody here to talk to you. And it was a social worker from Child Protection Services. And she said she went to the office and sat in a room with this person she never met before. That was the beginning of outside of her control, just like all the stuff that was happening at home. And this woman said to her, she had no problem with this woman, how are things going on at home? And she said at 10, her life went up in smoke. It became chaotic. Her head started spinning. She was so frightened because the jig was up. All that secret stuff that was happening at home was going to be out in the open. And it was outside of her control. And that worker, she said, asked me to take off my shirt, she said, because workers are looking for bruises to see. And she said that was outside of my control. And she remembers how difficult that was. And the worker said, okay, well, I'm gonna have to take you home. said, outside of my control, and I knew, she said, when I get home, she was living with her mom. My mom was going to freak out. And there was going to be hell to pay for what was going to happen. Outside of her control, she said. When she got home, so you can imagine what happened. Mom was ranting and raving both at the worker, but also at her for being a bad child. And the worker, she said, we're going to have to go. And she said the worker told her to get, I thought this was interesting, some transition items. Transition item is a children's aid, we call it children's aid in Toronto, but a child welfare system lingo for you get a teddy bear or something that you can take that's familiar when you have to leave the home. The girl said, she was 19, said transition item. I thought it was interesting, she already knew the language of the system. You know, she had incorporated into her being by 19. So she got her transition item and she said, I got taken from home, outside of my control, and placed in a foster home. People I didn't know, it was temporary, new rules, had to live with children there, all outside of her control. And then that worker who got her, well, she told her, well, I won't see you again, but a new worker is going to come and see you, and that's going to be your family service worker outside of her control. And you'll get a children's service worker outside of your control. And she said, I had many, many workers over the time I was in care. She was 19 now. Because people's lives change. I get worker from worker to worker outside of her control. But she said, I also moved 12 times between 10 and 19. And in Ontario, similar to BC, this is a pretty good life in the system, only moving 12 times. Just the way it works. Home to home to home. Outside of her control. Outside of her control all the time, or at least feeling that. And every time you move in it was in Toronto, a big urban center like that, you have to move from school to school to school because schools don't take you, you move out of the territory. They're a catchment area, outside of her control. And at 18, in BC, like in Ontario, when you turn 18 in that situation, she said, they told me you have to live on your own. I said, but I want to stay in my foster home. I'm sorry, the system doesn't work that way, outside of your control. And you can stay as long as you're in school, and we'll give you a check to live on your own from 18 to 21, but at 21, she said, and she was looking forward to that, not forward, hopefully, she just knew it was coming. She was 19. At 21, both that check ends, but it's also, you don't call home. You're off, the kids call it, you're off the cliff, right? You're on your own, literally on your own. And she said to me, Irwin, because I think I made a mistake of asking her what she wanted to do when she got to university or college. She said to me, what makes you think that after all that experience of decisions absolutely outside of my control, from the time I was young, that I would ever believe that I could go to university or make a plan to go to university or college or do anything? And she said, that's why when in your job you give at every point you can young people and children a voice and a reason to be in control of their lives or make a decision for themselves or help them do that, you are enabling us to be fully human. And when she said that, you'll know, it sounded, because I was the education background, it sounded very much like Paulo Freire's stuff. But you could look at Erickson's psychology, or the work of Jean Vanier and his spiritual teachings today. And she said to me, it's not rocket science, right? It's common sense, and we know it for ourselves. That was one of the first things that I thought of when I thought about how I understood, and I'm not an expert. Dr. Korczak worked in his homes. And at some point, he may have said all of this, but he understood it. And it's crucial to the lives of our children today, because this is happening today. So how do we forget? And then I think about when I first came to the office. Our office takes calls from young people, and are from all over the province, and they have the right to call us, and they speak to an advocate, and they can tell the advocate what their concern is, and we're supposed to help them meet the need, elevate their voice, to make sure their voice is heard. So when I first became the advocate, I decided I'm gonna take some calls to see what is it my staff are gonna be dealing with, what are kids saying. And I remember here getting a call from a girl in a small town in Ontario. She lived in a group home. She moved from Toronto to this small town, and she got placed there by the child welfare system. So living in a group home, and she was calling, I think she was about 16, she's calling, and her concern was she didn't get enough salad dressing for her salad. So I'm here, and it was like at 9 o'clock, because we have extended hours on our phone lines sometimes. I'm thinking, I'm a provincial advocate, and I can't believe I'm talking to this girl about salad dressing. So I'm talking to her, and I think she said, you know, I don't know if any of you know kids in group homes, but they can be kind of rough and tough sometimes, or like they can like to sound rough and tough, right? So I'm talking to her, and she's getting pretty worked up. I think I made the mistake of saying, I don't think the right to salad dressing is in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, or she told me a bad word, and I said, don't hang up, don't hang up. And I asked her, okay, let me speak to the supervisor at the group home. Let me talk to the supervisor. The reason that this girl and her housemates weren't getting enough salad dressing was because too much, right? And they wouldn't agree to using a little bit, so they used too much, so the salad dressing was in the fridge, and it was their punishment, no salad dressing. Oh my God. So I put her back on the phone. She says, yes, this is true, right? That's why I'm phoning, because it's right in the fridge, we need the salad dressing, right? What is this? And I have the right. So I said, and then she said, you know, I said, what could she do? And she said, but here's the deal. We have been saying to this supervisor that we would, and if you know teenagers, right? Because all of this is half about teenagers. We have a thimble, so the young people in the group home got a thimble. And they said to the supervisor, we'll promise to use this thimble. We'll pour the salad dressing in the thimble, and we each get a thimble of salad dressing, solve the problem. We can use it now. And by that time, you know, the group home people thought that the kids were trying to outsmart them, which they were, right, because that's what teenagers do, and that this was all a big game to the kids, and they were going to hold their line. They could not give in. It was a power struggle. They give in there, chaos will ensue in the group home. Because that's how staff are trained in group homes, right? And behavior management. This is the culture. So give me the supervisor, and I'm saying, here's the plan, what do you think? I can't make that decision, you'll have to talk to the owner of the group home. So it's 9 o'clock, get me the owner of the group home. I get a call from the owner of the group home, I suggest this, he says we can't give in, but I will allow it this once, right? And it came after I said to him, manager, you know, you're at home, I'm at home, we're talking about a thimble of salad dressing. You not think this is a little bit ridiculous, right? That this is not necessary. He agreed, and he made the change. But here's the thing that I tell people about that. There's two. One is, if he hadn't backed down, and it shouldn't be about that, but if he hadn't backed down there, what happens in that group? The staff insist you can't use that thimble, you can't use that salad dressing. And then the young person says to the staff, for want of a better word, F off. And then they get consequenced for that. That's what the language of group homes. Go to your room. You lose privilege. Some group homes you can't call home tomorrow. Call your mom tomorrow. And what does the young person do? They throw the bowl at the staff. And then what happens? The police get called. And that young person is charged. Because so important today, because it is possible to do otherwise. It is possible to do otherwise. We know from years of experience, from his work, it's possible to do otherwise. The other piece about group homes is that when I was in Japan, again, one of the people would want to know about our system, one of the workers in our system in Canada. And he said something, and I don't know how it came up, but he said something about he loved the children he worked with. And I pointed out that in Canada, you couldn't say that. Because if you say, I love the children I work with, you are over-engaged. You are counter-transferring. You are unprofessional. And I'm telling you, they thought this was crazy. It was actually one of those cultural divides, right? When the people who worked in the children's home in Japan just they had no concept of how to understand what you mean. You don't love the children you work with. How is that possible? And I thought that was another piece of learning. So we're going to do a group home review in the province, one of our next steps of our work. And we will use the work of Dr. Korczak to influence, we will talk about it, to influence our review, so that we reinsert that learning. So it's not some crazy provincial advocate that thinks work can be done differently, but there are people who have done it throughout history that can inform us how to work differently. And the last thing I think about where his work can be influential is a story. We get involved in child deaths from time to time. We don't have the same mandate as, say, in BC. But when a child death happens, in my mandate, oftentimes we ask for an inquest to be held. When we have inquests, we work and we bring young people together, and they help us inform the inquest from a child's perspective. What could be different? That's what an inquest is for. And there was an inquest into the death of a 2-year-old child in a foster home. And the 2-year-old child was murdered by a 14-year-old foster child who had moved from home to home to home. And the last home she was in, she didn't want to leave, but she had to leave. And the first night she was in her new home, I hope you're following me, she got up in the middle of the night, took a pillow, and smothered the 2-year-old. So there was an inquest. How can we prevent this from happening again? And the inquest focused a lot on the 14-year-old who was surviving and in jail now, not the 2-year-old. What in heavens made her do that? And how can we prevent a child from doing that again? And in that course of that inquest, we were talking about all these moves that children make. And this girl said, this girl in our group that was informing us told the story about garbage bags. And it's similar in your province too. And she said, when we move from home to home to home, one of the things that really bothers us is that we don't have luggage. We put our stuff in garbage bags and get told, throw the garbage bag in a worker's car or take it on the subway in Toronto, and we move from home to home. And moving our stuff in garbage bags is demeaning. It tells us what people think of us, how society feels with us. We hate it. And so she said when she was in child welfare care, she got together with some other kids and went to some staff and said, we're going to raise money buy luggage for our agency. Kids in our agency don't have to move with garbage bags. And they did that. And she said, I didn't know where she was going with this, and she said, that was fantastic. That was really important, youth empowerment and all that stuff. And then she said, she realized that it didn't solve the problem. She said she realized that when we move from home to home, we're actually moving from placement to placement. And if we were moving from one place where we felt secure and safe and cared for, and visible, not invisible, and we moved to another place where we were going to feel the same way, cared and supported and loved, then probably we wouldn't care so much about the garbage bags. That the garbage bags, she said, she realized, were an institutional solution to a human problem. It was easy to get the luggage. And what she said we needed, and she said, I remember her pointing at me and saying, you guys are always creating institutional solutions to human problems. And what you need to do is create human solutions to human problems. And that's much more difficult. That's what you need to do, because nothing will change until you do that. And that has, like many things, what young people have said to me, sticks with me like glue when I think about that. And I think about policy and how policy is created. And it's always created from the top down, from those towers on Bay Street in Toronto to Rolla Street in Victoria or Vancouver, where people in ministries work to create policy, but that's where it's created. And it's very seldom created from the bottom up, where people work, where young people and children are. But if we want human solutions, that's where it's got to come from. And how did Korczak run his place from the bottom up? And how do we learn from that? And he did what people will tell you in the systems, in those corporate towers, and my office is in a tower too. We'll tell you, oh, it can't be done. Insurmountable problems to make it happen. But when you work from the bottom up and create policy from the bottom up, we will learn how to create these human solutions. And young people and children will be better served. Those are three ways in which I think the learning from Korczak can influence us. So I mentioned this journey, right? So my office will, inspired by me being here, but by the invitation and talking to Jerry and your association, will hold an event in Ontario. I don't think there's ever been one. We'll reach out to the Holocaust Center in Toronto. We'll reach out to you for advice and maybe participation. We'll get you there to hold an event in Dr. Korczak's name, and we'll co-sponsor it in my office in Toronto so that there's a presence in Ontario. We will use his work in our group home review and cite it so that there's some credibility there. I'm part of, because of my positional authority, it's called the Canadian University Students for Human Rights, for Children's Rights Association. So they don't know about this body of work, and I'm on the board now, ex officio, I'm allowed to be on the board as an officer at Ledge, but I will certainly bring your association with them. I think there's a number of other ways in which we can find ways to work together. And I don't do this in any selfless way. I'm telling you that I believe using the work of your association, the work of Dr. Korczak, will bolster our work. Because I think our office sees things in a similar way. And the changes that we can leverage by using the credibility of the work will make a difference for children. The last thing I would say to you is that I work in many First Nations communities because First Nations children in Ontario are probably the group of children who are most hampered by the realization of their rights under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And when I do that, I work with my staff who are Aboriginal, and I remember one of my staff saying to me, you always are looking at the next horizon, you're always looking forward, trying to get somewhere, do something. And her culture, she said, we tend to look back. And you don't take the time to do that enough. Because you're always, where are we going? What are we going to do next? And it's true about my personality. And she said, you don't take the time to look back and you don't honor your elders. I think because I'm fast approaching that elderhood, but I'm not there, that took hold, right? I'm thinking, yeah, that's true. And I think your association and my being here is a step towards looking back and honoring just as a Jew, but as a person working in the field with children. And I think that's important, and it's certainly in keeping with our work across our office, that the First Nations community has brought to us. Well, I commend you on what you're doing. I can't say that too strongly, and I thank you again for the invitation to be here.
And we might be the Canadian Dr. Korczak.
No way, promise low, deliver high.
Are there any questions? Do we have questions to ask?
I have a follow-up question.
There's one behind you. Could you be second, do you mind?
You mentioned the Aboriginal. First of all, let me say that I admire the work you're doing, and I think it's fantastic. I'm a Holocaust survivor, and I'm involved with the healing and reconciliation of children that were in residential schools. And my question to you is, the church, with high morals and so on, for over 100 years, where was a Korczak in all this 100 years to make sure that these kids would come home with an education? Over 3,000 never came home, were murdered, sexually abused, physically, and so on. And how come that over that period of time, there was no one there to speak up? There wasn't a Korczak to say this has to stop. Have you got an answer for that?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. I'm hoping that's a rhetorical question. I don't know where that person was. I would- Well, that's our, it's not our job, it's not my job. Part of my job is our job, right, to make up for that. No, never again.
The lady.
We have to live by that, I guess.
Yes, yes.
You said that some of the children, they move 10 times from home to home. That's a
Yeah.
good thing. So it means that some of them move 20 or
That's
more
correct.
often. Why, if the child is happy in the home, why do they have to move to another home?
Well, each situation, I would argue, is different. Sometimes a child can be happy in a home and a foster parent might not be happy with that child. Sometimes the demands of the child can be too strenuous for the foster parent, and the support to the foster parent or the group home isn't there. There's a variety of reasons. Sometimes a foster parent decides to get out of the fostering business. Sometimes and I'll tell you the truth, they need a bed, they call it that, right? The system calls it that. And I wanna say, there's no one person who's in that children's aid system and is evil, it's the way the system works. But they need the bed for another child, and this child needs to move because that foster home specializes in younger children and need to move to a different foster home for a different age group.
A few years ago in Canada, in Vancouver, was a situation when the foster parents become attached to the child and two sisters, and they become attached to the parents and they actually wanted to adopt them.
Yes.
And then as soon as possible it happened? No,
No.
just were moved. And they moved to a much worse situation, and it was a court battle, and actually
Yeah.
those foster parents got the kids back, but I don't understand, if children are really happy and parents want to be there and they could be successful, the system wants to prove that they are wrong, we are right, and they move to stragglers. And I worked for years in mental health, and a lot of children on the streets, they are from the foster homes, they are moving 30, 40, 50 times,
Yeah,
and they end up on the streets.
yeah, that's true.
I think that one of the things that I think it's important to focus on is, we're talking here about the children, but in fact what we're really talking about is a societal approach or a lack of support for children. And you mentioned before that way of looking at society, or how well different countries do, is how they deal with children, how children do. And I think the question is almost defined a little bit differently, which is how much attention and how much resources do we actually dedicate to the people who are there to support children? So that if we look at our society, who are the people who get paid the least? Childcare staff and people who work with old people. That by itself defines, I think, how our society in fact looks at some of this. And so, when you look around the whole question of child abuse and the difficult situation children are in, it's often the fact that the policy decisions that have been made has not been that they're so bad for children themselves, but they're horrific for the people who are supposed to provide the support for them.
I agree. And can I say two things? One, because I don't want to leave you hopelessness. I think that there's some hope here, and I'll tell you why.
I'm not doing this.
Let me say, I agree with what you said. I think, in all my experience as an advocate, but also working in the field, when we treat children in a way that's respectful, listening, we listen to them, as my wife said, not, when you say listening, it's not the way you listen to me, when I say something, you weren't listening and I say, I heard you, and I repeat exactly what you just said. Not that kind of listening that men tend to do, but real listening, when you listen to children and young people, it's liberating for the workers, for the staff. When your management allows you some leeway in decision-making in what you're doing, then you can allow young people leeway and children leeway. So it actually, if we work with children in a particular way, we treat children in a particular way, we value them as a society, it will be liberating to us as a culture. You know who talks about this? I just met him again. He was another guy I met, Rafi. He has this child honoring society in Salt Spring, and he talks about the philosophy you just spoke about. But in terms of being hopeful about the system, child welfare system, one of the things we did, and when I came to the office, was I do these listening tours. So I go around, wherever I go, I listen to groups of young people. I make sure I meet them. And I was in a little city called Guelph, Ontario, and I met a group of young people in care. And I was listening to them talk, and they were saying all these things, moving from home to home, we feel invisible, we're scared of what's going to happen to us when we walk off that cliff, blah, blah, blah. And I said to them, 20 years ago when I started working in child welfare, I heard the same things. And this girl says, okay, buddy. She said, buddy, okay, buddy, what are you going to do about it? And I thought, yeah, you got a point. It's my job. So I went back to Toronto, and I remember, it won't be too long in this story, but I remember watching in the United States when I worked until back in the 80s, this group called Children's Express. And they were a group in New York City, and they got little 10-year-olds and 11-year-olds to do reporting, and they would go interview like the president or big people, and then they would get their articles on in the New York Times. And I saw this on 60 Minutes, and I remember thinking about them, and I went with a group of young people at the time we were working with, and we went to New York, and we said, how can we do this in Ontario? It's just working children's aid. And when I got there in New York, I met the organizers of this Children's Express, and they were just finishing holding hearings in U.S. Congress, and children ran these hearings on children who witnessed violence, and then they were writing a report. I thought, this is remarkable. It was on national public television at the time. So I came back thinking, how are we going to do this? And I held on to that idea, and when that girl said, what are you going to do about it, buddy? I brought 70 children in care, young people in care together in Toronto from all parts of Ontario, and said, I have this idea, do you want to do that? And they said yes. Well, I knew they would say yes, so it was kind of cheating, but I knew they were going to say sure. So I said, okay, let's do that. We hired 4 young people in my office from the system, and they worked with 60 young people who were volunteers, and they held hearings at the legislature in Ontario into how to change the outcomes for kids who leave And the young people worked with the legislature, and because we managed to talk the legislature into it, the clerk of the ledge, and she would say now she didn't know what she was getting into, but she met the young people, the volunteers, and she taught them how hearings are held. And she said, whatever you need, we will give you. What hearings that members of parliament do, you will be able to do. Answer, translation, you'll use our committee rooms, we'll broadcast it on television. And so these young people created this system where they asked for submissions written, and then they picked 50 people to come to the legislature and give testimony to them. They were the panel. And then they invited, I remember this, they said they invited, I was one of them, VIPs to sit, but we couldn't talk. And then they decided, well, you weren't VIPs, the young people were VIPs, you were decision makers. They invited the decision makers to come, but they couldn't talk, they could only listen to the testimony. And it wasn't just young people they wanted to give testimony, they asked the head of the child welfare system to come and give testimony. And then they were gonna write a report, which they did. And they thought over those 2 days, you know, the 50 people would come and there wouldn't be much attention. But over 2 days, 800 people came to the legislature. So they struck a nerve, right? And it overwhelmed the legislature, the security didn't know what to do. But the young people ran it, I want to tell you that, the young people ran it. And they dealt with security, and they dealt with the clerk, with support of course, but they're the ones making this. They did the videos, if you look on our website, you'll see the videos they made of the hearings. And they did the music, and after the hearings, they decided to write a report, and the young people, we hired the young people to write their report. They called it My Real Life Book, which is a long story. And in that report, they made some recommendations. And in the recommendations, they said, we thought that this was about giving us more support past 21, that we need money for universities and colleges. And in the report, they said that. They just said that's a quick win. That's what they call low-hanging fruit, I think they said. Low-hanging fruit. Government can do that tomorrow. Do it. Yes, keep us supported. Change it so that if we want to stay in the foster home past 18, we can stay there. Simple rule change, you can do that tomorrow. The more difficult things to do are that when we're in the system, we feel isolated and alone and invisible. When we're in the system, we feel set apart from our own lives. I remember one young man said he spent 18 years in the system, and he always felt like his name was AJ. He said he felt like he was always the passenger in a life of the car that was called AJ, and the social worker would drive the car, and he was just a passenger in his own life. And then, of course, he said they would throw me the keys at 18 and tell me to drive. And he said, I need to be in control of my own life, not be the passenger in my own life. And they said, you have to do that. And so they put out this report, and they said, the way in which we want you to do that is to create a working group and make a blueprint to create a system that does all those things while you do the low-hanging fruit. And they gave it to the minister and the two opposition party critics, and they did an event at the legislature again, handed it to the minister, and the minister accepted the recommendations. So there was some negotiation in that. They said two things. When they were doing that report, they had said they want the critics to be there and accept the report. In Ontario, probably like BC was, very fractious politics. Minority government, the parties don't talk to each other literally right now. And this was just about a year and a half ago. And they said they want all three parties to accept the report together. The minister said, I can't do that. And they said, we've made this a safe process. Right? This is young people time. We've made this a safe process. We're criticizing our parents. You, the state, because you are our parent, minister, and the system that is parenting us. And we try to do it in as respectful and safe way as we can, but say the truth. And we want you to have a conversation with us and with our other parents, because minister, she said, you're our parent today, But tomorrow, there could be an election, and that person over across the aisle could be our parent tomorrow. You're like joint custody parents. And we need you to come to the kitchen table and have a conversation about your children with us in as safe a way as possible, without blaming. That's the only way things are gonna change. I remember her saying that to him in a meeting, and what is he gonna say? He can't say anything, which is the beauty of children speaking up, right? He said, okay. He said, but it's gonna take some time to do this blueprint. And, cause they had given him, less, I think 11 months to do the blueprint. He said, you can't do the blueprint so quickly, it's too harsh a timetable, and she said, you ask us to live on our own by the time we're 18. 11 months to do a blueprint isn't any more difficult than that. He said, okay. And they bring the committee together, and the committee had to have more young people on it than adults, and they created a blueprint. And when that blueprint was released, it called for fundamental transformational change in the way children in Ontario are brought up by child welfare. And the 2 points about that. When they announced it, they announced that every university and college in the province would be tuition free for youth in care up till the age of 25. They would get additional funding if they made it to care, $500 a month up to the age of 25 if they were in post-secondary education, sorry. They would fund, and that was the only new money, I think, 50 transitional workers to work with young people 18 and 21. They had agreed and this is all the low-hanging fruit, they agreed to school success protocols for every child, no matter what age, in care, with every in the child welfare system. And that's all supposed to be rolled out this fall. There's more, but they picked the low-hanging fruit, and then they said we will work on the more difficult issues. The good thing about the difficult issues, the hopeful thing to me is, one, young people, they will never not have young people involved again. And the good thing about it is the more difficult issues actually don't cost any money. Making a system work so that young people feel in control of their lives, it actually doesn't cost anything. It's about doing things differently. It's much more difficult because the faculty of ed here is going to have to be involved, or in Ontario is going to have to be involved. The faculty of ed are going to have to talk about how do we do our work differently with children, and social work departments are going to have to teach social work differently. The language of the system will have to change. It is going to take lots of time, but the hope is that with young people there, the government is committed with their blueprint to move forward on how to do that, all led by young people. And to me, that's the hopefulness of both Korczak, but also that the system can change. It doesn't have to be the way it is. And I'm very hopeful that we can make a difference.
Thank you so much.